Mr. Chairman.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me say thank you to our witnesses. Gentlemen, here's where we are now. The American people are worried about what's ahead with regard to Russia. The public now gets most of its information from leaks, from daily press stories, and apparently inaccurate tweets from the president. This feeds distrust and causes Americans to question the legitimacy of our government. So I believe the committee needs to lift the fog of secrecy about what really happened to our democracy. That's why it's so important we have open hearings with the Intelligence Committee, the FBI, Homeland Security, and Treasury. And I believe a key to a successful investigation is following the money. Yesterday, I wrote a letter to the chairman and the vice chair urging the committee look into any and all financial relationships between Russia and Donald Trump and his associates. I'm also taking this issue on as a ranking member of the Finance Committee, of which Senator Burr and Senator Warner are also members. I and other members of the Finance Committee have already urged that the committee exercise its authority to obtain and review Donald Trump's tax returns. This review ought to include the Trump Organization and its partnerships. Senate investigators should also look into any violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which ensures that investors are not paying bribes overseas. The Treasury Department is responsible for other programs and investigations that may uncover suspicious financial activities by Donald Trump and his associates. It is already a matter of public record that entities associated with Donald Trump have been the subject of millions of dollars of fines for willful, repeated, and long-standing violations of anti-money laundering laws. Information about Donald Trump's finances, his family, and his associates may lead to Russia. We know that in 2008, the president's son said that Russians make up a pretty disproportionate cross-section of a lot of our assets. Since then, we've gotten mostly smoke and mirrors. The committee needs to follow the money wherever it leads, because if money laundering, corruption of any kind, or fishy real estate deals point to the Russian oligarchs and criminal elements, then the Russian government may only be a step or two away from us. So now, my question. There is an extraordinary history of money laundering in Russia. Billions of dollars from corruption and other illegal activities have been moved out of the country. What that means is that Russia's corruption problem may also be our corruption problem. So here's my question for the three of you as experts on Russia. I'd like you three to tell us about corruption in Russia so as to help us follow the money in our investigation. And here's my specific question. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Watts. How can the committee track this fuzzy line between the Russian oligarchs, Russian organized crime, and the Russian government?
Thanks, Senator. I would first start off with I'm not the foremost Russian expert. I came to this through the Islamic State and ISIS. I'm really a counterterrorism person for the most part, and came to active measures mostly because active measures came after me. The second part that I would add to this discussion, though, is there is a money trail to be searched for and discovered. And we've focused very heavily on elites in our public discussion. What are elite people doing? But this influence action has both a virtual component and a physical component that's happened. I would say that what I can't see, which I would want to know, is what is happening in Eastern Europe. There's a disproportionate number of fake news outlets, conspiratorial websites that are run from there that are English-speaking editors that are pro-Russian, trained in Russia sometimes. How are they funded? That would be one component. My guess or my estimate, my hypothesis working in the intelligence field is that there is some sort of Russian intel asset that is funding them in one way or another through some sort of scheme. The other part that I think we should be looking at is follow the trail of dead Russians. There's been more dead Russians in the past 3 months that are tied to this investigation who have assets in banks all over the world. They are dropping dead even in Western countries. We've seen arrests in, I believe it's Spain, and different computer security companies that are based in Russia, which provide services to the United States. These are all huge openings to understand how they are funded by the Russian government. I don't have the capability to do that from where I sit, but I think that's a huge angle. If you can prove that part of it, I have to say on the influence side, we can see it. The one thing that's been misconstrued in the public discussion about Russian influence is that it's covert. You can hack stuff and be covert, but you can't influence and be covert. You have to ultimately show your hand. And that's why we've been able to discover it online. But the missing part is, how did they conduct this influence? There are newspapers, there are media outlets. The Balkans are littered right now with these sorts of outlets, and that's where I would start to dig on the financial space.
I'm almost out of time. Dr. Rumer, same thing. This fuzzy line is what I'm particularly interested in. Organized crime, oligarchs, and the government. I heard you talk about one person. You couldn't comment on him, but just give me your analysis about this fuzzy line, because I keep coming back to that.
Well, sir, it is definitely a fuzzy line, and I think those relationships are probably best discussed not in an open session, because
But you're saying they ought to be discussed.
I believe they ought to be discussed.
Good. Fair enough.
But I do believe that it is something for our intelligence community to take up rather than for us to discuss in
I
open.
probably ought to quit while I'm ahead.
Senator Blunt.
Mr. Chairman, can Mr. Godson just finish that question?
Dr. Godson, quickly. Turn your mic on.
I'm very pleased that you're having this open session. I think it's very useful. But I do think that this is a sensitive subject, and so that it will require skill and care on the part of our society, so we don't overreact, which in our history we sometimes have, to being surprised. And so I do think there was more time to discuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blunt.
Thank you.